Welcome to The Access. I'm your host, Hayvi Bouzo. In this episode, we'll be discussing the upcoming Israeli elections, the deal of the century, and the Israeli airstrikes against the Iranian militias in Syria. To talk about all of this, we are joined by David Pollock, Bernstein Fellow at the Washington Institute, and Amir Tibon, Washington correspondent for Haaretz. Thank you so much for joining us today, David Pollock and Amir Tibon. I want to start by asking you about, obviously right now everybody is talking about the upcoming Israeli elections. Right. There are different powers, political parties who are on the table. People are, expecting that maybe somebody else would be winning in the upcoming elections. What do you think is going on, especially that we have, the Likud party with some defections from it, and then you also have the Liberal Party who's been also weakened by some differences there. What is going on? And if we can summarize it, I know it's really complex.
Who do you want to start?
Yeah, I want to start with whoever wants to start with on this. Start, Amir.
I'll say something very general.
Yeah.
We are still 2 months away from the election, and in Israeli politics, 2 months is eternity, and anything can happen. But if we're looking today at the polling, at the picture that is emerging, it looks like Prime Minister Netanyahu is most likely to win another term. And I'll give you just one statistic about Israeli politics that maybe will surprise some of the viewers. On the week that the election was announced, there was a poll on Israeli Channel 12, the biggest news channel in Israel, and they asked people, do you want Netanyahu to continue as prime minister for another term or not? 52% of Israelis said we don't want Netanyahu to continue to another term. 33% said we want him to continue.
Okay.
That is an excellent poll for Netanyahu. If those numbers hold, he is the next prime minister. Now, you can say, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's really low,
52% don't want you, and you are about to win, but the important...
Those are like Trump's bad days.
The important...
right?
but
it is like Trump.
But here is the important issue. In Israel, the system is parliamentary. We don't elect a prime minister or a president directly like in the United States. People vote for a party. And the largest party out of all the parties we have in our parliament, it could be 12 or 13 after this election, the largest one is the one that sets the coalition. If Netanyahu gets between 25 and 33% of the vote for his Likud party, he is by no doubt the next prime minister. And that's why this poll was good for him, because the 52% who don't want him, they're not going to all vote for one party.
Yes.
They're going to split their votes to many different fractions.
Exactly. But I mean, when we talk about the polls, I do have my own speculations because we saw this system fail.
The polls
the
don't
world.
always work.
Yes, in the American elections,
That's
in
true.
Brexit, we saw that failing over and over and over again. Amir is from Israel. You know about this. You told me, no, we have different poll system. But what do you think, David? I mean, when you hear about the polls saying that Netanyahu is going to win.
Look, I'm a pollster myself, as you might know, and I've worked on Middle East polls, including Israeli polls and Arab polls and others for a very long time. And so I'm very familiar, I think, with both the problems and with the usefulness, the value of these polls. You're absolutely right. They don't always work. And I think a large part of the problem is that when the polls are very close, you have to be honest enough to say, I don't know the answer. It's too close to call, as we say. You have to be willing to say that. That's what happened with Trump. That's what happened with Brexit. The difference was just a few points. And if it's that close, you don't really know.
But the media was saying in both cases, they're
no way
going to win.
But that's not what I was saying.
So you are media.
I think the polls in Israel, the interesting thing about it is that the polls in Israel don't ask a specific question most of the time, like the one we discussed, who do you want to be prime minister? They ask, who are you going to vote for? And there's a whole list of parties. What a lot of times happens in Israeli elections is that the pollsters get, let's say, 90% of the parties right. But they miss the numbers for one or two parties, and that could be the whole election in there. I'll give you two examples. In the 2013 election in Israel, The polls were right about the number of seats Likud was going to get, around 30. They were right about the number of seats that the Labour Party received, around 15. Most of the parties, there was no problem. But Yair Lapid, who used to be a television anchor before, and was a political newcomer, a total, out of nothing kind of made politician, he stormed with a new party. The polls gave him, before the election, 12, 13 seats. He got 19. Now, you can say, oh, the polls only missed, 6 seats out of 120 in our parliament. That's not a big mistake, but it was a huge mistake in the sense that he became the star of the election, and he became the real, he was not prime minister, he became the finance minister, but he became the real, number two.
Right.
Then in the next election, 2015, the polls showed a very close competition between Likud and Labour. And they also showed a very good success for the right-wing Jewish Home Party, which was competing with Netanyahu from the right wing.
Exactly.
In the last week before the election, we're speaking here in English, and in Israel, the two languages most spoken are Hebrew and Arabic, but the word that Netanyahu really embodied before the election was a Yiddish word, Gewalt, save me. He was crying, Gewalt, I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose.
Right-wing
party,
yes.
And
what
happened
them to help him.
In the last week of the election, the polls still showed that, Jewish Home was getting 13, 14 seats, Likud was getting 24, but there was a shift. And the polls got the Labour Party correct, and many of the other parties, but they missed this transformation from Jewish Home to Likud that allowed Netanyahu another term in office.
Okay, what about now, David?
Okay, so now, good. So now there's something new and different. This time, and that's the legal problems that Netanyahu is having, the corruption cases.
Yes,
and
we're going to be talking about
really serious possibility that the Attorney General of Israel could announce an indictment before the election.
Okay.
I think that's actually quite likely.
Okay.
And
whoa.
Now, it's not a conviction, and it's not even a final indictment. It's the first step in a complicated legal process. But this would be something new and different. And there's even a brand new poll that asks people, how would you vote if there is an indictment? If there is an indictment against Netanyahu, is that going to change your vote or not? And what the poll shows, it's really, I think, fascinating. It's only one poll, but so far. But what it shows is that Likud would probably lose only 4 seats. Only 4 seats
total.
Yeah, right. That's right. Okay. Instead of 29, they would get 25.
And they will still be the majority.
Yeah. So even if not the majority, the plurality, right? The biggest single party, the biggest single party. So even if there is an indictment against Netanyahu before the election, it's quite likely that Likud would lose a few seats, but not enough to swing the election the opposite way.
But when we're talking about an indictment against Netanyahu, I mean, what we're talking about in terms of his political future. I mean, we know that it's corruption cases.
Sure.
Probably, if you can compare to other countries in the region, it's nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
Very small.
I'm not sure Israel wants the comparison, but it's true.
Yes, it's true.
That's true.
But then what does that mean for his political future? And knowing that, if he wins, he's still going to be there for years to come.
Right.
What does that mean for Netanyahu and obviously for the Likud party? I mean, this is talking about the future of the political structure of Israel, possibly.
Well, it's very complicated, and because it's never happened before exactly this way, we don't know for sure what the answer is. But it looks to me like this: if he's indicted and he runs anyway, which I think is probably what's going to happen, and Likud wins anyway, which I think probably, not definitely, but probably will happen, and he becomes the prime minister under a preliminary indictment, then there's still going to be a legal battle. And I don't think that Netanyahu shows any sign, that I can see anyway, that he would resign just because he has a legal issue that he has to fight in the courts, even while he's prime minister. Okay?
Yes.
So that could drag on for at least another year. And then most, I think, Israeli legal experts agree that if he's not just indicted, but convicted
Yes.
of a serious crime, bribery, then he would have to resign.
Then.
But he might not be convicted, or he might be convicted of a lesser crime, which is called breach of trust. And some legal experts say that that's not enough. That's not a felony in American terms. That's not enough to force the prime minister or another official to resign. He might have to pay a fine, he might have to be punished in some way, but he might not necessarily have to resign his office. So you could have a situation where, kind of like we have here,
Yes.
where the elected leader of the country is facing all kinds of very serious
And
legal
is very unpopular in the
problems.
media.
Yes, but he still stays in office, and he might just get away with it.
Yeah.
I think for Netanyahu, the biggest challenge when we mix the legal and the political, it is to have in Israel, nobody is elected prime minister in Israel. A party is elected, and then that
Their
party can form a
representative.
coalition. And we have 120 seats in our parliament. For a coalition, you need 61. The biggest challenge for Netanyahu will be to have a coalition that is willing to support him even if he's indicted.
Right.
And that's where the real magic numbers come in, because Likud will probably get, let's say, around 30 seats in the Knesset, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. He needs still another 30 seats from other parties to remain in power. There is, all of the left-wing parties will not sit with him after an indictment, that's obvious. Some of the centrist parties have also stated they will not sit with an indicted prime minister. Moshe Kahlon, who is now his finance minister, said, I will not sit with an indicted prime minister. This means that he needs the right wing alone to receive more than 60 seats in the Knesset, not just Likud with its 30, but also the Jewish Home, Lieberman, and the ultra-Orthodox, the very religious parties. Today, if you combine all of the right-wing parties in the Knesset, in our parliament, they have 56 seats. And they rely on a centrist party, Kahlon's party, to have a majority. If this is also the results after the election, that the right wing alone has close to 60 but not 60, Netanyahu is going to be in very serious trouble, because he will not be able to remain in office after an indictment. What he needs is the right wing to break the 60-seat
And
ceiling.
that means you have to make alliances with the other right-wing
Yes.
parties and kind of give in.
Yes, and that could also, I think, create trouble for him on a different front, because
Like, for example.
if you have a pure right-wing coalition, which is something that Netanyahu has not had in the last two governments, it makes it much more difficult to make progress on peace, for example, because he will be
And that's what we're going to be talking about.
He's
He
going to
doesn't
be-
care about that.
Yeah, it's true, but it means that he's extorted by his right-wing coalition
Yes,
partners.
Right.
Yeah, and
He's okay
been-
with that.
He's okay with not
Yeah,
making
right.
peace.
Yes.
But at the same time, he has been making progress in terms of his relationship with the Arab world.
That's right.
Did that win Netanyahu any votes inside of Israel?
It's helping him.
Yeah.
It's helping him,
It's
definitely.
helping him.
It's helping
and I'll
him.
tell you something else that is helping him, which is very surprising for Americans, but I'm pretty sure this is true, and I heard it a lot from very senior Israeli politicians from all the different parties. Another thing that really helps Netanyahu with the voters in Israel is not just that he has managed to create at least the image of better relations with Arab countries, but he also has managed to have good relations with Russia. And there's a huge block of Jewish voters
Yes.
in Israel
Who are Russian.
Right,
Yes.
who are ethnically Russian or from the former Soviet
Yes.
Union. And they, and other people too,
Yes.
think that this is very good for Israel, that Netanyahu's really good at that.
Yes.
And every time he goes to meet Putin, it gets him a few extra points of popularity, believe it or not,
Yes.
in Israel.
The Russian Jewish community in Israel,
Yeah.
are they pro-Putin, or they just want to have some sort of normalization of relationship with
question.
Russia? What is it?
They're pro.
It's a combination of both, I
Yeah,
think.
it's both.
Some are pro-Putin and so
Right.
don't like Putin, but they want to.
Right.
They don't want to be on his bad side.
And they think that,
Yeah, they're
Russia is an important country. It's dangerous to be
Yes.
on Russia's bad side. That's true.
Especially with the lack of
Especially
United
with
States.
what's going on. That's right.
Yes,
and what's going
pulling
on
out,
in Syria
basically.
and with Iran. And I think many of these people, I know this because I have some in my family.
Yeah, we're feeling that way.
Many of these people,
Are you Russian?
I mean, no, who married into my
Oh,
family.
married. Okay.
No, but they still have a good feeling about Russia as a country.
My question here is, where is the Israeli public today in terms of right wing, left wing? Where is it shifting in general if we talk about the majority?
I think most Israel is a center-right country. Most Israelis place themselves, there are different polls that show different trends of, more right-wing, more centrist. I think that most Israelis still, it's not a majority, but a plurality would position themselves in the center. You have a big right-wing bloc, and among the Jewish population, a small right-wing bloc that is growing bigger when you add into the mixture the Arab population of the country, which is 20% of the citizens, and they are more on the left wing.
They're the left wing.
If you look at the Knesset, at the makeup today of the Knesset, the pure right wing has just under half. The center has about, I would say, a third. And
third.
Yeah, and then there's the left wing.
Yes.
And there have been movements over the years, if you look at the last 15 years, between the center and the right. Not so much between the right and the left. The left has stayed pretty static.
Yes. And smaller.
It's smaller, but it's not insignificant.
Which one is getting bigger, the center or the right?
Right now, I think the right wing is growing.
It's growing.
But
Yes,
I
yes,
believe I think this is a trend that it can change
It
between
could change.
between the
It
right
could
and the
change.
center.
Right, it could change.
It could change.
That's right.
In the 2013
Why?
election,
Can I ask you, like both of you, why?
Why the
are
right
you
wing
seeing
is
the
growing?
right wing is growing? Is it because it's providing more
Yeah.
security? The fact that
Yeah.
now we see that Israel is, normalizing slowly but surely its relationship with its neighbors.
Yes.
What is it?
Well, I think it's both of those things, and it's also the absence of, as many Israelis see it, of an alternative that is more moderate or peaceful or whatever you want to call it, more left-wing, more dovish. They don't see a realistic alternative. They see that
To who?
On the Palestinian
On the
side.
Palestinian side, because now,
Palestinian
yes, that's what I
Yes.
want to
That's
hear.
where they don't see that there's
There's
a
hope
good
for
enough
peace.
partner, that there's a good enough partner. Hamas, certainly not. Abbas, too weak, indecisive, not willing to make a deal. We tried, it didn't work.
So there is a kind
they
of
gave
like a
up.
loss
They
of
gave
hope.
up on that, yes, yes. And meanwhile, life in Israel is very good. People feel pretty safe most of the time, The economy is doing well, and people feel
They're
like
happy with the status quo.
they are. Not everybody,
But the majority.
but I would say the majority, and they don't see a better alternative. That's always the question.
But where does the normalization of relationship with the neighbors come into play with this whole thing? How would that fit
Yeah.
into this? We're happy with the status quo feeling.
First of all, I don't agree that Israelis are happy with the status quo. I think
Okay.
Israelis fear it could be much worse. And that's the main distinction. I think
Yeah.
Right.
people are angry
Well.
in Israel about a lot of things, about the public transportation not being good enough, about the hospitals not being good enough, about the rent prices and the fact that young couples cannot buy apartments in the cities. But at the end of the day, when they get to the polling station, many people give those issues a second place in their priorities. And the first place is security. And that's where I agree with what David said.
Yeah,
The
but,
fear of
I'm
what
just-
if things become worse?
I want to say that's true, that security is the first issue, and it's always a question of what's the alternative? Is there a better alternative? But according to some of what I think are the best polls, and my own kind of intuition, right, from traveling there and talking to a lot of Israelis all the time, and I want to quote a very I think, good Israeli expert on this, Tamar Herman, who who does polls and publishes them. And when you ask Israelis, in general, is your life good, not so good, very good, pretty bad? Or if you ask them, are you optimistic about the future of yourself, of your country?
Yes.
If you ask them, how are things going? Is the country going? It's amazing. You get typically at least 70% of Israelis saying, I'm satisfied, I'm optimistic about the future, I'm confident about Israel, and I like the direction.
But is that maybe we're seeing a youth versus maybe...
No, it's across demographic
across the board.
lines.
Okay.
And even the Arabs in Israel say the same thing. 70% plus say, I'm proud to be an Israeli.
I saw those numbers, by the way.
It's amazing. Amazing.
Yes.
And it turns out, if you look
even better than before on the Arab side.
Definitely better than before. Economically, they're doing much better than they used to. And in educational levels and in social integration, there's a lot of issues that they complain about, like everybody.
Yes.
But they still feel things are getting better and better. And if you look at the whole world, then you compare Israel with other countries, how they feel about themselves. It's number 10 or 11 in the whole world.
Countries.
Right?
Yes.
And that's why people, they see Netanyahu as sleazy, corrupt, opportunistic, phony. They're tired of him. He's been around for so long.
He's been around for so long for Israel.
But things are okay.
Things are okay.
Why should we take a big chance?
Then how would people view any normalization of relationship with the Arab world?
Well, they certainly like that. They like that. That's an extra good thing.
An extra good thing. But how?
Good thing.
And in which frame?
It would be seen as good for security,
right?
Because you have better security ties with other countries. Good for the economy because it opens up opportunities that you don't have today in the region. Good for the international standing of the country, and it's also
and against Iran.
Yeah,
against Iran.
Yeah.
People fear Iran in Israel?
Definitely.
Is that something on people's minds?
Yes.
I want to say, I think...
And I want to hear both of you, because I know that you have different views, and that's what I wanted on the show, by the way.
We talked about how in every election there is one party that would come and surprise and kind of turn the table. In the last election, one of the parties that had a good showing was Kahlon's party, the finance minister. And he, during his campaign, had a really interesting moment.
That's the Kahlon is the
He's
TV
today
personality.
the finance minister.
Kulanu.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
At some point, during the campaign, he talked a lot about social economic issues, about, again, hospitals and transportation. At some point, he said, I've not heard of a single Israeli who left the country because of Iran. I've not heard of it. But he said, I know many young Israelis who left the country because they cannot buy an apartment with the rent, with how the...
So he's touching on the daily life.
And Netanyahu had one moment in the election which was really interesting. Netanyahu said, I'm aware that people have problems with, housing prices, with rents, but I think about life itself. And I think about Iran. This was the quote of Netanyahu. And a lot of people mocked him for it and said, this is your answer to people who don't have the ability to buy an apartment, but Iran wants to kill us. Yeah. But I think the Israeli electorate is very fragmented, and different politicians speak to different parts of it. And when Netanyahu talks about Iran, he knows that for his voters, this is a priority. Whereas if Lapid or Kahlon come and say, okay, we know Iran is a problem. Our military is dealing with it. How about taking care of housing prices? They are speaking to a different electorate.
Yes.
And that's part of the puzzle we're seeing, why different politicians will address different issues.
Different issues. In general, these other parties, are they worried about Iran? Do they think, like,
nobody
for example,
likes
in
Iran
the United
in Israel.
States...
Nobody likes Iran in Israel. It's a consensus issue. I mean, even
everybody agrees on Iran being the enemy.
A few lawmakers in the Arab parties, but if there is one consensus that nobody likes Iran and everybody thinks it's bad.
Because the resistance, because the Arab They like
You will have
Israel
some-
because it's the resistance access.
But it's even not the majority
Even
of the Arab Israelis.
No. What has
Yeah.
Iran ever done?
Yeah,
That's
to
successful.
really help.
it's a really,
the
it's a
Palestinians.
fringe
For
view.
its
To
own
really
people.
help.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Nothing.
They know that. They know
You will
that.
have a fringe view about this, but I think really this is one of the issues where you will have maybe 80, 90% of
Right.
Israelis sharing
Yeah.
the same view, which is
yeah.
hard to get.
Okay, so it is a view. It is because in the United States we have an issue, and you know
That's
David,
true.
and
It's
obviously
more
you know
divisive
Amir.
here.
It's very
Much more
divisive. You have
divisive.
country
Right.
sides and parties
Right,
and
right.
Congress members
Yes,
who
yes,
are
yes, yes.
much more friendly to Iran.
That's right.
But I think Americans
Yeah.
don't view Iran in the same geographical lens
Sure.
that
Yes.
Israelis
Of
view
course,
it.
yeah.
Israelis see Iran on
Yeah.
their border in Lebanon.
Coming
They
in,
see
yes.
it's trying to
Yeah.
influence the Palestinian arena.
Right, right.
They see their presence in Yemen, which is not so far from our southern tip of the
Borders.
country. So it's a living issue for people. I think you can have a debate on how it filters into the politics. Some people have said in the security establishment that Netanyahu is using Iran for his
Right.
own politics
Yeah,
too
yeah,
much. But you will not hear someone come and say, Iran is actually good. That's not gonna. What you will have is a more nuanced
now.
and a more nuanced. Like the former head of the Mossad, Tamir Pardo, our he said, Iran is a big problem, but we know how to deal with it. The bigger problem, in his view, is Israel's internal divisions and problems.
There are a lot more Israelis who are talking about that now.
Okay.
There are.
And
yes.
why,
Yeah.
if you can summarize, and I know that our show probably is too short to talk about these specific issues
Okay.
because they're very
Yeah.
diverse.
Right.
It's a very complex
Yeah.
country. It has vibrant
Yes.
democracy.
Yes.
What are those issues that are
The
very
internal issues,
divisive
right.
between people? What are the main disagreements
It's a long
between people? And I want to kind of,
It is a
we're
long
trying
list.
to inform our audience
Look,
about what's going on.
One of them is about religion. Okay, there's a big debate in Israel about the place of Orthodox Judaism
Yes.
in the country, in the laws, in society, in politics. That's a big issue.
About the
And-
growing number, the fact that they don't serve in the
that's right.
army.
And there are well, some do and some
Now
don't.
some
it's
do.
about half and
Yeah,
half.
half and half.
And the
exactly.
laws, what can you do as a citizen and what can't you do?
And the political power and the money.
Are the laws
but
turning more and more to the right, protecting the right,
religiously?
or no? How is it
you know,
changing?
I don't see that so much.
What do you think, Amir?
I don't see
I
that.
think
yeah.
Israel, when it comes to the religious issues, again, it's a bit of a fragmented country. You have
Yeah.
different parts of the country that are going in opposite directions.
Mm-hmm.
The area of Tel Aviv, which is our biggest
that's
city
true,
and
yeah.
the most secular city, Tel Aviv is becoming more open, more
Mm-hmm.
secular. It has the biggest pride parade in the Middle East and one of the biggest in the world, actually.
Yeah.
And you are seeing that more and more cities in Israel, where there are secular majorities, are adopting that kind of attitude.
Yes.
Jerusalem, which is the biggest religious city, is becoming more orthodox, more intolerant. And so you have this kind of split.
Okay.
And I think, by the way, that reminds me of processes that you see in other parts of the
Yeah,
world as well,
that's
where
right, sure.
different,
Red states and
let-
blue
yeah,
states.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like if I asked you, under Trump, did America
Yeah.
become more conservative or more liberal?
It became
think-
both in extreme
Yeah,
ways.
Exactly. And I
Exactly.
think Israel,
Yeah.
it's, in many ways, is going
Yeah.
through, on religious issues,
Yes.
is going through a similar process. Some parts of the country, also out of anger about the religious laws, are turning more secularly,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
other parts
Yeah.
becoming
Yeah.
more religious.
Yeah.
And we need to keep it together, everything, connected
Yes.
somehow. That's the
Yeah.
challenge.
And
Yeah.
I want to go back to the Arab world and
Okay.
the deal of the century, because that's one thing that everybody talks
Which
about.
century?
There's the administration, talked about this. We were expecting this to come out.
Yeah, sure.
And they kept postponing
Yeah.
it.
Right.
Now
right.
we know that there's Israeli elections.
right.
Things are probably going to be on hold until
Yeah,
then.
Pompeo actually said it publicly,
What did he say?
officially, that we're not going to do anything about this until after the Israeli election.
Who do you think can make peace happen from the Israeli? Who are the nominees that, in case, let's assume that your predictions did not happen and Netanyahu didn't win, who would be the other, the alternative,
okay.
and who is more able actually to make such a deal, hypothetically?
I'm going to let you answer this first.
Because
I think the only Israeli history shows that only two types of leaders have made progress towards peace with the Palestinians and other countries, or either right-wing leaders or left-wing leaders who have strong security credentials. Generals like Rabin, Sharon was a right-winger and then kind of moved to the center, but his military credentials played a big part in it. I think right now, if you look at the current election, first of all, the Palestinian issue is not a big priority in this election. Most people are not voting on it. They are voting either on the general premise that somebody can bring security, whether it's Netanyahu or Benny Gantz, the previous chief of staff, who has the head of a centrist party, or they are voting on economic issues and cultural issues and religious issues. And that's why we have a lot of small parties. Between all these candidates, I think the two who have the best shot at making peace somehow are actually Gantz and Netanyahu. Gantz, I think, in his heart, is closer to...
And he is from which party?
He has his own... He has his
brand new party. Is he center?
He used to be... He used to be the chief of staff of the Israeli military from 2011 to 2015.
So he has the security background.
Yeah, he's a general, and he formed his new centrist party. And I think in his heart, he's closer to the positions of the Labour Party, of making peace. Netanyahu, coming from the right wing, also would have a lot of credibility if he decided to make peace. But I think the problem for Netanyahu is it will be very hard for him to form a coalition that is not reliant on the right wing. And once you have a right-wing coalition, it's harder to make peace.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Exactly.
What is the right-wing view of peace with the Palestinians, even if let's assume that the American administration does come forward and present...
Big assumption.
And present that peace deal.
The right-wing view, and here we're talking about, both the extreme right within Likud and the smaller right-wing parties, whether they're religious or not religious. The right-wing view is very simple. We are not going to get out of the West Bank. We're going to stay there. The most that the Palestinians will ever have is local autonomy in the West Bank. And there will not be a Palestinian state. And we're not going to divide Jerusalem. We're not going to share Jerusalem.
And that's all of the right wing, or that's the right wing after? Even the Likud?
Today, Likud used to be a bit different, but today that's where it is.
That's where it is today.
That's where it is. So that's very clear and very simple.
Yeah.
But I want to say something on Likud. If Netanyahu decided to change his positions, I believe not all, but a big part of Likud would go with... If Netanyahu, who is today, let's say, over here, would move to the center on these issues, at least half of Likud would go with him.
But would you see if that happens and half of Likud would go with him? Would you find some center parties also joining Netanyahu?
It's possible.
Yes.
It's possible. If there's a real opportunity if there's a partner on the other side, if the American government is really pushing this hard, if other Arab countries say,
step in,
we really want to help you with this, just you need to make a deal, If all of that, all of that happened,
a big list of the ifs.
It could happen. It could happen. But it's a long shot, honestly. I'm afraid.
I think for the Trump administration, their biggest hope should be that Netanyahu, he's likely to remain anyway, but he remains prime minister, but he's forced into a more centrist coalition. That's the only hope I think they have. If he has a pure right-wing coalition, their peace plan is dead on arrival.
Is dead on arrival.
I want to just say, if I may, I'm sorry to
it's a good discussion.
Pompeo, in his speech at Davos yesterday, I guess it was, he had one really interesting line that I don't think enough people paid attention to when he was talking about this issue. He said, we're going to wait until after the Israeli election, and then soon after that, we're going to really get to work hard on this. But, he said, this will not be, these are his exact words, this will not be a U.S.-driven process. And that's so important, I think, because what that means is that the Trump administration is...
not going to pressure.
Not going to push
Netanyahu
too hard on this. It's going to have to come from the inside, from Israel, from the Palestinians too, and from other Arab countries, maybe. But the United States is not going to force this, no matter what, no matter who wins the Israeli election, no matter what kind of government. there is in Israel.
Are they going to present the deal
Yes,
of the
I think
century?
they
will
will.
present it.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
And it's going to be, as you're just suggesting now, it's going to be like the previous, basically plans and proposals by the United States to the Israelis and the Palestinians.
It's going to be different.
Why is it going to be? Not in terms of the details, because we can talk about the details. The details are probably much more kind of detailed, transferring of people from one side to another, doing a lot of...
I think that there's... I think
Why is it
we're all
different?
just
Tell me.
guessing here,
Yeah, we're guessing.
But my educated guess is the main difference is going to be that this plan will say that Israel will maintain complete security control of the entire West Bank. Complete security control of the entire West Bank. Maybe
Means that there's no political way, armed factions within the Palestinians.
That for sure.
It's beyond.
Police, but it's
beyond,
more than that. The Israeli army will stay in the West Bank, even if you call it a Palestinian state or a peace agreement, whatever. It doesn't matter. You call it that, but the Israeli army will still be there.
But would that include some dismantlement of some settlements who are the smaller ones?
Yeah, maybe.
I think they will. I agree here totally. I think that they will do a differentiation between settlements and military.
Yeah.
They will say that the settlements, some of them have to come down and be evacuated, but the Israeli military, maybe not with actual physical presence all over the West Bank, but it will retain, aerial control, intelligence control, some army bases, control over the border crossings between Jordan and the Palestinian state.
Right.
And with regards to the other point that David made, I think is also very important what Pompeo said. In my calculation, and this is, it's just a guess, I think they are counting on the Arab countries to create the pressure that they don't want to be seen as creating themselves. And they are counting on Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Bahrain and Egypt and Jordan to basically come to the Israeli public and present this as an opportunity. And say, this is an opportunity, don't let it slip away.
But to do the same
Israeli
thing
public.
and to the Palestinians too.
And to the Palestinians.
Yes. But I think for the Arab countries to pressure the Palestinians, it is easier to do in a closed room environment than publicly. Whereas to come to the Israeli public with a positive message and to say...
Well, that would be good. If they do it, it would be great. It is an opportunity.
It would be an opportunity.
It is,
And do you think these countries in the Arab world who are now making steps to opening their relationship with Israel are willing to go there? And what would they get in return? And with Iran, the Iranian threat to the region would be enough.
Okay. I have a few things to say about that are not, I think, the usual things. Number one is I think that these countries, not just the governments, but the people in these countries are ready to do this. And I know that
they're already ready.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they are. And I know that from the polls that I do all around these Arab countries, in the Gulf, in Egypt, in Jordan, the people there say we should encourage both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, to compromise. We should do that. Okay? That's good. But at the same time, I don't think that there's really that much more that these Arab governments can get from Israel. They already have security cooperation. They already have technology. They already have diplomatic support here in Washington and against Iran to the extent that Israel can provide that. But Israel is not going to fight Iran for these countries. It's not.
It's going to fight
Iran
defend
itself against
to
Iran.
defend itself.
Yes.
And that would be in Syria.
Yes. And for many Arab countries, that's very good. They love it. But they can't look to Israel to protect them directly from Iran, in Yemen or in the Gulf,
in other areas,
in Lebanon,
except for in Syria.
Except maybe in Syria.
And even in Syria, Israel will only intervene for its own interest.
Right.
Israel is not going to fight for someone else in Syria.
And the best reason for Arab countries to do this, and this is maybe I'm surprised at myself for even saying this.
Yeah.
The best reason is to help the Palestinians, not to help Israel or to help themselves. It's finally the Palestinians can get something from this.
Yes.
After all these years of just
suffering.
talking and, you know, refugees and nothing.
Yeah, and
happening.
even
if there's a compromise,
the political atmosphere,
it will actually help
Yeah.
the Palestinians, and that will help the region as a whole become more stable.
because the
more
Palestinians
cooperative.
also have their problems with their own political
Oh yeah, huge
leadership,
huge. Yeah,
the
right.
corruption.
To call it leadership is a bit of a problem, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, it's not
Huge,
really leadership.
We're
and
not
that's-
even
and
talking
that-
about
right.
Hamas here.
And that's the main
And-
problem, the lack of leadership.
Yeah, yeah, huge problem. It's very difficult, but I think there is something new going on here that, up to a point, can maybe tip the balance in a better direction.
I think with regard, I want to connect this again to the Israeli public and the right-wing, left-wing trends, and I wonder if you're aware of this poll that
Yeah.
I saw from 2013. I
Okay.
don't remember who commissioned it. It was a poll that wanted to check Israeli public opinion about peace with the Palestinians and peace with the broader Arab world.
Yeah.
And there was one question in the poll: would you support dividing Jerusalem, giving the
Okay.
Palestinians some part
Yeah.
for peace with the Palestinians? And it
Yeah.
did not garner a majority among
Right.
Israeli Jews.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when the question was, would you support doing the same thing
Okay.
in Jerusalem,
Yeah.
but in return get peace agreements with Saudi Arabia and UAE,
Sure,
and
sure. Right.
there was more than 55%.
Yeah, yeah,
Who
right.
said yes?
Yes,
Yeah,
who said
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So
And
they're willing
so-
for the bigger
so
piece.
yes,
It-
because the Palestinians,
it would help.
you know, the conflict
would
with the
help.
Palestinians
Yeah.
is bad for Israel, and we are, you know, people are dying because of it. Communities, the place that I call home in Israel is on the border with Gaza. It's a kibbutz that is situated next to Gaza, Nahal Oz.
Oh,
became
Nahal Oz,
famous in the
Yeah,
last
very
war.
famous, right.
You know, our fields were burned over the last few months because of these kites that Hamas is sending. It's not a pleasant situation, but at the same
Yes.
time, it's manageable. And if you have peace with the Palestinians, you solve one piece of the puzzle. But Israelis want to have a bigger umbrella.
Yes.
And they want to have partners against Iran. They want to have partners against Hezbollah. And so this is why the idea of a broader peace is very...
More appealing to
Yes,
the Israeli
definitely,
people.
definitely.
More appealing.
I agree with that, and I actually did some of these polls myself.
Oh, you did some of these polls.
And believe it or not, around the same time, Khalil Shikaki, a Palestinian pollster, and with Tamar Herman and others did polls like that, asking about this. And I did a poll that was commissioned by an Arab foundation in the Gulf. They didn't want it to be public, so I can't say what country or what
Yes.
name. But they commissioned me, and they funded my poll of Jewish Israelis. Would you be willing, how interested are you in peace with the Gulf Arab countries, and how would that affect your attitude on the Palestinian issue? And what I found is that 40% of, and that's a lot, that's a big number in Israel, 40% of Jewish Israelis said that they would be more willing, like the poll that you just cited, to make concessions to the Palestinians in order to get peace with the
With
Gulf
the-
countries,
with the
right,
Gulf
with the Arab
countries.
world as a whole, and especially with the Gulf countries.
Exactly.
Better relations was the way the poll asked about
But
it.
it was 40%.
Yeah, but 40%
It's
is
really
a
high.
huge number.
Of Jews,
It's-
40% of Jews.
exactly.
And that-
So
that-
that could be from...
That creates a
oh, yes.
majority
That's
when you
a
add
ver-
into it
that's
the Arab
right.
public.
That's a
That's
very
true.
large number of
That's
people
so
who say
true.
more willing than I was before. Okay,
Yes.
that puts you over the majority mark, and that's
Yeah.
very good. Very
And that's
positive.
the change.
It definitely is a change.
That's happening today.
Yeah, I wish it could happen before the Israeli election.
Well, that's what, you know, a lot of things we're going to have to see what's actually going to happen after
right,
the Israeli
that's
elections.
right.
Things could go in either
Yes,
direction.
yes, that's right.
In
Yeah.
terms of Syria, there's always the question about the
Yeah.
Israeli public view of Bashar al-Assad as an as a guy who works
Yeah.
for Iran, as a guy who is allied with obviously Hezbollah, who've been fighting on his behalf in Syria, and the Iranian militias are filling Syria. How does the Israeli public view this person?
Very negatively. He's seen as a murderer, as a wicked person. Most Israelis, I think, were not, most Israelis don't necessarily know who are all the different factions in the Syrian civil war, but they know that they hate Assad because of his alliance with Hezbollah and Iran, but also because of the cruelty and because of the inhumane actions.
That was shown in the Israeli media, how
absolutely.
the cruelty of the Assad regime?
I know.
I'm going to tell you a story about this in a minute.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I want to just tell you about something that I witnessed personally myself. And I was so surprised and moved by this that the Israelis, many Israelis, sympathize with the Syrian people because of the terrible suffering that they know about during this whole civil war. And 2 years ago, I was at a public meeting with Israelis and Palestinians in Jerusalem, and the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, who is very right-wing, in general.
Yes.
But he stood up in public and he said, I want to tell you something about what's going on in Syria. He said, my mother was born and grew up in Aleppo, in Halab, in Syria. My mother.
Where's my mom?
My father was Egyptian. My mother was a Syrian Jew, of course, but that's where they lived. And she had only good things to say about the people in her city in Syria, the neighbors, Jewish or not, Muslim, Christian, whatever they were. And when I see what those people are suffering in Aleppo today, I say, this is just like the Holocaust. This is the chief rabbi of Israel saying that about...
And he's a right wing.
And he's a right-winger, exactly, saying that about Arabs, about Muslims, about Syrians, who this country is an enemy, but the people are not the enemy. And Israelis really believe that. They really feel that.
And sympathize.
I agree, and I can tell you another story. We did, I used to work for a television show in Israel. When the Syrian civil war started, we did a number of programs from the refugee camps in Jordan, from the refugee camps in Turkey, from Idlib province, and each one of these shows received very, very high. It was the top-rated, show on the Israeli television. People were interested. After one of our stories, I don't remember which one, there was a demonstration that was organized in Tel Aviv of people who wanted to sympathize with the Syrians and also collect donations to bring to Syrian refugees. I think it was in Jordan.
Right,
And one of the hardest parts for me over the years having to cover the Syrian civil war is that every time I did a story about Syria, people that I met were less and less interested to talk to the media. Because people told, the last time I had a story was in 2016 in Europe, meeting the refugees on the trail.
Yes.
And people that I met told me, we've spoken to so many journalists and nothing happens. The world doesn't care. Why should we talk to you? But when I would mention that I'm from Israel, a lot of times people who initially were not interested in talking to me, they said, oh, if you're from Israel, we do want to talk to you because you are our neighbors from the next door, and we want you to understand. And I think there is a potential for more understanding and more dialogue. And the Israeli people don't like the Syrian government, but they like the Syrian people, and they would like to have more of these connections if it became possible.
If we are talking about possible changes in the Israeli government, or basically having Netanyahu stay, some people were fearing from the Syrian, diaspora in general, and then obviously in the Arab world, that Israel could strike a deal with Assad. Do you see this happening?
No.
No.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Why not anymore?
I think Israel tried for 2 decades. Likud and Labour governments and Kadima, the centrist party of Sharon and Olmert. We had, 6 different governments tried to strike a deal with Assad, first with the father, then with the son.
Before they became war criminals.
All of that
happened
all of that happened before
2011.
The last attempt was actually in the early months of 2011 or the late months of 2010, right before the civil war. Nothing came out of it, and I think Israelis, after these 2 decades of trying and failing, and watching what has happened in Syria in the decades, almost decades since the civil war, people are saying we need to hold on to the Golan and just not give it back, and especially not to Assad.
Right.
The formula that at the time was suggested was that Israel will give back the Golan and Assad will detach himself from Iran and Hezbollah. This was the idea. The strategy behind it was, if we can get Assad to cut loose Iran and Hezbollah, it makes sense to give the Golan. I think today it's impossible to imagine Assad cutting back from Iran and Hezbollah. He depends on them for his life. If he cuts Iran right now, who protects him?
I want to thank you so much.
Sure.
Both. This conversation can go on
Thank you.
for a very
Yeah, no,
long
it was
time. It's
great.
very
I
interesting. I
enjoyed
really
it, too.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
it was
much.
good.
Thank you. That was it for tonight's episode. Thank you for watching us. Good night.